So honored today to have one of the foremost photographers in wrestling history and one of the most notable media members of all time, George Napolitano. George, welcome to Under the Ring Pro Wrestling Conversations. How are you doing today?
Very well, thank you. And thank you, Phil, for asking me to join your podcast.
Yeah, I always wanted to get you on here. So, just background, I first met you when I was 10 years old. You were signing copies of the New Pictorial History of Wrestling at B. Dalton Booksellers at the Smith Haven Mall on Long Island with Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff, Greg the Hammer Valentine, and Cactus Jack. That's the first wrestling people I ever met in my life, were you four. Um, what is it like for you learning the impact that your work has had on the wrestling industry and the wrestling fans?
I never thought of it. It was just something that I did. I didn't realize how many people really read it, or how many people would refer to it and tell me that this was their first book or this was their first magazine, and how much they learned just from looking at the magazines. Even learn how to read and write, and it's amazing. I didn't never expected it, and I know obviously didn't do it for that reason.
So when looking up information on you, I also found the clip of The Rock saluting you with the Terramana toast on the red carpet of Black Adam. What did that mean to you? Not only that he recognized you and your work, but went out of his way to kind of let everyone know how important you were in pro wrestling.
Well, he's a very nice guy. Unlike his character he's doing right now, he's just a very very nice guy. And I take pictures on the red carpet these days. I do concert shows and movie premieres, and I was at the premiere for his movie. I didn't know he was going to come up to me. I didn't expect him to come up to me. I was just hoping that he would just give me a nod to know that he recognized me. Because sometimes when people see me on this red carpet, they don't know it's really me because they don't expect to see me at something like that. I know John Cena has walked by me, and so has Batista, and then they say, "Oh, George," because they don't expect to see me at a venue like that. And the way he spoke about me was just it was amazing. I didn't expect it, and it was something that was a little embarrassing in a way. I'm with 50 other photographers, half of which I want to say 2/3 of which have no idea what else I did or do. And they asked me afterwards, why is he talking to you like that? They had no idea because they weren't really wrestling fans. They were just photographers that do movies and what have you. And I really, really never expected it. Just never expected it.
That kind of goes back to something we had Bill Apter, contemporary viewers on the show months back. And, I've always really looked to you guys as kind of the example of how to act in pro wrestling when you're around wrestlers, when you're around, promoters, stuff like that. You're respectful of the genre. You're professional about what you do. And to me, like, that's why he singled you out that day. Like, you were somebody who was good to his grandfather, his father, I'm sure other family, friends, and all sorts of connections that he's had. He's like, I think he even said, he's like, I've known who you are since I was like, a kid.
Yeah. He came up to me when he first started, when he first broke in. He came up to me and says, "You don't know who I am, but I know who you are since I'm 10 years old. He says, and you've always been so nice to my family. You're nice to my grandfather, my grandmother, my mom, my dad." Says, "If there's anything I can do for you, just ask me. Just ask me, and I'll do whatever I can." And I said, well, I said I really didn't think I needed his help. I don't mean it in a nasty way, but I appreciated it. But it wasn't that I went out of my way to try to get into him, to get closer to anybody.
Yeah.
And that's what he said. And every time he sees me, he'll say, "How you doing? How you feeling? Can I get you anything? Do you need anything?" He'll always ask me, what can he do for me? Always.
Did you ever? I know you went on a number of road trips for wrestling, and we could touch on that a little bit. But did you ever shoot Hawaii when his family was running that territory?
The grandmother wanted me to go, and I was going to go, and I just never got there. It's one place I never got. I really never went there. It's one of the few places.
That's interesting.
I used to read who was there, and I know it was a stop off on the way back from Japan, for the
Right.
most part, or the way going to Japan was a little semi vacation, just to get sun, and to have a good time before or after coming back from Japan.
And then even by the time his grandmother was running that territory, it was significantly different than it was
Well, it was.
previous.
I'm talking now in the '80s,
Yeah,
mid '80s. She was still running it though, but then it started to change, like everything else changed.
yeah. So for me, photography is art. What made pro wrestling something that appealed to you so much as kind of an artist?
Well, as a young boy, I just watch wrestling on Channel 5 in New York. And Tuesday night it was from Sunnyside Gardens. Wednesday it was from Bridgeport, and Thursday it was from the Capitol Arena in Washington. And I used to watch it every night of the week. And locally, they would have it at a place called Rollorama in Brooklyn, and also at Sunnyside Gardens in Queens. And I went in the early '60s with a couple friends and just enjoyed it. And I didn't think of it as anything other than I enjoyed it. But then when the Beatles came in '64, my wrestling days were dwindled, and I didn't follow it like I did. I was too busy learning how to play the guitar and into music at that time.
So how did you end up being a photographer then? Like, how do
Well,
those two loves kind of marry?
okay. I was playing in a band. We recorded 3 records for Mercury, Smash Records. I have three plastic 45s on my wall. But that was what I did. That was my first life, I say. And towards in the middle of it, I got a camera, and wherever we went, I would take pictures. And I would just like taking pictures. We went on cruise ships. I took pictures. Wherever we went, I used to be a photographer for us, for the band. And that's really how it happened. Then one day I'm watching TV and it says that wrestling was going to be in Madison Square Garden. And I go to my girlfriend, who has been my wife for 50 years or so. Can you want to go see wrestling? She said, "Oh, okay." I said, "I used to watch that when I was a kid." And I went there and I brought my camera and I was hooked again. And it said next week, Sunnyside Gardens. And we went to Sunnyside Gardens and I brought my camera and I met somebody who said, "You must take good pictures. You got a great camera. Do you want to work for me?" I said, I had no idea what that meant. I had no idea what he was talking about. And he says, "Next time you come here, show me your pictures." So a month later, I went to Sunnyside Gardens with a bunch of photos. And he said, "You want to work for Ring Wrestling? You want to work for me?" I said, "Yeah." And that's how it started.
Wow. And have you taught photography also?
Yeah, I was a school teacher for over 30 years in New York City in junior high school. And besides being a math teacher, I had a photography as a shop class. And we had a dark room and 7 or 8 different enlarges, and I taught the kids how to take pictures, how to develop, and how to do it. But that's yes, I did.
And so, what was it like? We talked about this a little bit. You talked about this a little bit at the '80s Wrestling Con when we caught up. But you're at ringside pretty much every month at Madison Square Garden with Bill Apter. Can you tell me about the first time you might have run into a teenage Paul Heyman that was then working alongside you?
Paul was a couple years in, and then Paul started coming around, and he wasn't too well liked. I had no problem with him. I talked to him. I didn't care. I had no idea. But he was a fan. But I would say I have no recollection. But he didn't bother me. He didn't bother everybody. According to some people, he was pushy, or that was just being there and caught up in the heat of the moment. But he was a nice kid. We were older and he was younger than us. And we had no idea how much he loved it. We just knew he was a big fan, like us also.
What's it like catching up with him as you've seen kind of the path that he took into the industry over the years, to where he was manager and then he's running his own company and now he's
Yeah,
doing all sorts of other stuff.
it was funny how he was able to get himself in, but he pushed for it. He worked hard at it, and he made it into himself. It was when he was in ECW that I would be there all the time, and every time he saw me, he says, "If anything I can do, please." Yeah. but I didn't need him. I didn't need anything from him. I don't mean that in a nasty way. I don't mean like
Yeah.
I'm above it. But he told whoever, he says, this guy goes anywhere he wants to go. Don't stop him. The security, whatever. I was just had free reign to do whatever I wanted because he said that I was so influential to him as a kid.
I mean, he was probably looking at your photos and your books like all the rest of us were before he was at ringside too, like, and all the
Yeah.
different things he'd see your work in. That's what's great about talking to somebody like you. There's nobody that I could throw you a name as that you're not going to have some sort of a at least interaction with. I think at one point or another. I'm interested in knowing. You talked a little bit about him at the '80s Con too, about your relationship with the Grand Wizard and how that was kind of like. Was that sort of your introduction? I'm fascinated about that time period and New York kind of wrestling history in general, but he seems like such a vital part of all of it.
Yeah, well, the first time I went, it was at Sunnyside Gardens, and the fellow who asked me if I want to work for him for ring wrestling brought me down to Arnold Skolin, and Arnold Skolin said, "Yeah, okay, kid, yeah, you can take pictures there anytime you want." He says, "But stay out of the way. Stay out of the way. That's my only advice to you is don't be in anybody's way." And so I always looked over my shoulder, and I always try to watch out for the next guy, that I'm not in the way. And that same day, I met the Grand Wizard. We had no idea. I just knew he was the Grand Wizard from watching him on TV. And he said, "Oh, you must be a good photographer. I like it. I like your equipment." I had all my camera bag and what have you. He says, come here. And he brought me to Jimmy Valiant and introduced me to Gentleman Jim Valiant. He was a good guy. And Jim Valiant was my first interview. I interviewed him and did a story. And then from that, the Wizard introduced me to everybody in the dressing room and said, "This is our new photographer. He's going to be around. Be nice to him." And just the other day at that convention, I saw Barry Windham.
Right.
And I told Barry that I was good friends with his dad. He knew that anyway. I said, but I had kind of remembered the thing because we had just did the talk. I says, your dad was with the Grand Wizard. And anytime he saw me, he would open up the door and tell anybody in the dressing room that they had to be nice to me and that I was okay. And I knew to do what I was supposed to do. And that was in Charlotte and in Houston and a couple places where he went after leaving New York. But getting back to the Grand Wizard, he was the one that introduced me to everybody there. So then the following month, again, we met again. We exchanged phone numbers. I showed him the story, and we became really good friends. And he told me about TV being every 3 weeks in Philadelphia at the Philadelphia Arena. He says, "You got to come. That's where you see everybody." So I went. I told him I'm going to go on a Tuesday, and I went. And when I got there, he brought me over to Mr. McMahon Sr. and said, "Vince, anything we need, just ask this guy. He's going to be okay with us." So it was his introduction that opened up the door, really did, for me to be doing everything anywhere.
It's interesting too, knowing also what his various roles were in wrestling. You know, once you do a little research on him, like Ernie Roth was doing publicity. Ernie Roth was doing commentary in Detroit, I think it was, prior to New York too. So he had so many other skills in addition to being one of the best talkers and one of the best managers out there pretty much ever. And I think he did that in another character before he was even Grand Wizard too, and he was Abdullah Farouk before.
Yeah, he was still Abdullah Farouk as he was the Grand Wizard early on.
He did them both at the same time.
Yeah, and that was actually one of the first plane trips I took. He told me tomorrow night not tomorrow night, but this weekend is going to be a big show in Detroit. You got to come. So I took the plane and I went to Detroit, and he brought me in to meet the Sheik, who he was the manager for. And then from that, I became friendly with Al Costello of the Kangaroos, who I used to watch as a kid, who was on all the Detroit shows. But that was my first plane trip to go somewhere to get stories on the different guys.
You must have logged so many miles covering this business.
I can't even imagine. Yeah.
But why did you want to cover so much ground?
Yeah, because I knew that no matter where I went, there were stories to be written, people to meet, and things to do, and it was something to do. I mean, I didn't look at it as trying to cover ground. It was like, to me, it was like a pay-per-view. Every month somewhere there was a good show. Every 3 weeks there was a show, whether it be in Florida, in Houston, Texas, in Minneapolis, Charlotte. Every 3 4 weeks there was a show that was the blow off, or was the end of their what they had been doing in that particular territory. And I knew that I knew that being there, I was going to be able to see the top stars and write stories about them. And at that time, I wrote for every magazine out there I would contribute stories to. They would say, just send me whatever you want. Whatever you got, just send it to me. And that's how I did it.
And it's interesting too, because I think a lot of people, in other time periods and stuff, wouldn't have necessarily, like when I was looking stuff up on you, you can find a picture with you with just about anybody who I want to in wrestling history. You and Hogan and Andre in Japan, and I know you've done trips to Japan and Puerto Rico and all over the place too. But it's that networking that got you. The reason that you are who you are is because you literally know everyone, and all the different pieces of it, and all the information, and kind of not necessarily when everything's going to happen, but you know where to be.
Yeah, well, there was, and then I used to get the phone number where everything was on my phone. Call up, and I would get the address, and I would mail the magazines, and they would like to see themselves in the magazine, and they would show it around, and that's what it was. They would show it around, and then people would say, "Can you do a story on me?" Okay, and that's how I did. But I would just pick out anybody. But I did so many that I didn't just do the main event guys. I did the undercard, and that's how I became really friendly. I mean, there was a time when I did the programs in WWF. I made sure to put Frankie Williams and Johnny Roz, Jose Estrada, S.D. Jones, Frankie Williams, even Lee Wong. I mean, I found spots for them because these are the guys I used to see. And by seeing them, I felt funny if I didn't have pictures of them in the magazines too. But I used to take care of everybody.
And it's interesting too, because I know you've talked about giving rides to different wrestlers to arenas and with all the travel that you did, people have to understand too, like this was pre GPS. Like I don't know how you knew how to get to everywhere you were going, but
I don't know either. I put on the GPS. I put on the GPS just to go down the block. I don't know how I did it. Don't know. Just the car knew its way to New Orleans and to Atlanta, and that was another thing. I knew when the shows were, so I would go Thursday night to Norfolk, Virginia. Friday night would be Richmond, Virginia, and then Saturday I can go to Atlanta from Richmond. But everything worked. It just like a puzzle. Everything, all the pieces just happened to fit the right time at the right place. And then having friends in all the different territories. That's how I really knew. Like Kevin Sullivan, I would call Kevin Sullivan, and he would tell me what's going on there. And Bushwhacker Luke would tell me what's going on in San Antonio, and that's when he was a promoter there, or in Nashville and Puerto Rico. I had a bunch of people that were friendly with Rick McGraw, God rest his soul, way back when. He would tell me where he's going, and if they went somewhere, all I had to do was show up, meet them, and they would then introduce me to whoever.
You mentioned about editing and writing the magazines, and obviously the books that we mentioned before too. Did you enjoy doing that as much as you do? Because you're mostly known for your photography, but like you've mentioned, like you were writing and editing entire magazines that I was buying.
Yeah, that's the thing. People say I'm this great photographer or what have you. You can use any word you like, but I don't get quote credit unquote. Not that I need it for writing all that stuff. I used to write so much stuff, so many stories, so many people, but it's kind of forgotten that I actually was a writer. For everything I took, I had to write a story to. Well, and I mentioned it the other day, and every story was 3-4 pages in a magazine and 7 to 10 photos. So whenever I took something, I would know that I needed the opening shot, the closing shot, and anything in between to fill the pages.
I'm also fascinated. You mentioned, I think somebody asked you this at Wrestling Con too, about your friendship with superstar Billy Graham and
Uh-huh.
how that developed. So was that before he was champion, and what was kind of the nature of your friendship with him?
I met him in Houston, Texas. He was this big muscular guy. I said, "Oh, this will be a great stories." I interviewed him, and I did a story for Wrestling World and something called Wrestling Today, I believe. And I sent him the magazines when it came out, and he was flabbergasted. He said, "Oh, this is great! This is great!" We became friendly just on that regard. He called me and said that he was going to go to a bodybuilding competition in New York. He says, why don't you come? It'll be different. I said, yeah, okay. And he said, I'll pick you up at the airport. And I went to Kennedy Airport, picked him up, and we went to the bodybuilding competition. And he placed pretty good, but Billy's legs were not up to par, if that means anything. And, but so I put the pictures in the magazine again of just a bodybuilding competition with Superstar, and he liked it. And then we just stayed in touch. And one day he called me and said, "I'm coming to New York," which meant I'm coming to the WWF. And I said, "Yeah, okay, and I'll pick you up." And I picked him up, and that's how I became his driver, so to say.
I bet you those were entertaining rides, though.
They were. We used to talk about a lot of stuff, not just mostly. We never talked wrestling. That was what they did. That was what I did. But then what we did together, we didn't talk wrestling. We talked whatever was going on in the world.
I remember even reading in his biography where he was talking about, like, when he'd call Dusty Rhodes, they'd just be talking about Bob Dylan albums.
Yeah,
it was like
because they don't want to talk wrestling. I mean,
I don't like talking about work when I'm not at work.
yeah. So it wasn't like I was trying to delve in and get information, which people think right now. You with somebody, you gotta quiz them on this and that. What they did was what they did.
And that's probably what they appreciated about you too. Is it's a friendly face. It's not somebody that's going to be giving them the 21 questions about everything that's coming up in pro wrestling. What's your favorite photo of a wrestler that you took? And is your favorite the same as the best one maybe that you took?
Well, the favorite is because was probably the best one, because the most widely used one is the one of Andre. The one of Andre holding up the 4 lady wrestlers. That's so when you mention, if I mention an individual photo of Cowbell of Superstar Graham with Dusty Rhodes, that's a picture most people, if you're a fan, you have seen it. But if the Andre picture was seen all over the world, it just so happened that became part of pop culture.
And did you prefer doing the stuff at ringside to like sort of the backstage studio stuff? Did those have, feel differently about them?
It's all about the ring, what's going on in the ring. Backstage stuff, I made sure I would get it. But most times, they were never ready until their match, prior to their match. So sometimes you would just hang around, and the show started, and you had to get out to the ringside. But it's all about trying to catch peak action, and that's what I liked more than the post photos. The post photos were fine. I made sure I would get it because you need it just to introduce what you're doing.
This is probably a loaded question too, but maybe I'll word it a little bit differently. I was going to ask you who taught you the most about pro wrestling, but I guess more what I'm trying to get at is, like, if you needed to know something that was going on, like, who were you turning to?
It wasn't like it is today. Everywhere across the country had its own wrestling promotion. So to find out what was going on, you had to keep track of what's going on around the country. I had the way I knew is Kevin Sullivan would tell me what they're going to be doing. Never told me what the finish was going to be, how it was going to come off, or how it was going to be. Some people tell you that I knew this, I knew that. You know what? They didn't know anything because it was kept quiet. I didn't really know myself. But being there, you can learn through osmosis. I didn't need anybody to tell me what to do. I didn't have an earplug in my ear. Look left, look right. You just go with the flow, and you know where it's going to be.
Yeah, you pick up the instincts on
Yeah,
even, probably predicting what you expect is going to happen, because, you have to anticipate it a little bit too. Even as a
yeah.
photographer, you have to anticipate to be in the right spot.
Right spot, the right time. One spot led to the other. But by watching it as much as I did and being there as much as I did, you knew what was coming next, just because it's just one would follow the other.
I know you said the Grand Wizard told you to stay out of the way. Was there any
It
time
was
that you
Arnold Skolin who
Arnold
said,
Skolin told? Okay,
Arnold
and
Skolin,
was there
stay out
ever
of the way.
was there ever a time that you didn't stay out of the way and paid for
Well,
it?
sometimes it's kind of hard. You get stuck in the middle with a chair or something like that. I know one time I'm in Puerto Rico and Abdul the Butcher's, come here, come here, come here. I said, I ain't going near him. Come here, come here. And all of a sudden he reached out of the ring and lifted me with my collar, my shirt, just picked me right up and put my head between the ropes. Unplanned. That wasn't part of the show. Some people might have thought. But I got a little too close. You had to stay away. That was my advice. Stay away.
That's great. We're going to move on to something we call the 3 count now. It's going to be 3 quick questions and your answers. First question: do you remember what the first wrestling card you went to as a fan was, and what the main event was?
As a fan, Antonino Rocca against Pampero Firpo. Rollerama. Firpo. I met Firpo later on, a couple different times. And that day, after the end of the match, I try to go get Pampero Firpo's autograph. He runs up the stairs. He sees me, and he comes running down the stairs, running at me, screaming, ah! Scared me crazy. I met him years later and told him that, and he went crazy. He just loved it, loved it, loved it. And on Twitter, I'm friends with his daughter, and she heard the story. She knows the story. I was a fan, but I was afraid of him, and he scared me like crazy.
That's great. Yeah, and that's a great Twitter account to follow too. It kind of breaks down his whole history
Yeah,
in pro wrestling. I follow that one also. Second question: what's the best part about being a photographer in New York City?
there's so much stuff going on day by day. This week was the Met Gala. Being a photographer, you can do so many different things, go so many different places, and you'll find subjects, whether it's sport or celebrity, you'll find it. I mean, I didn't do the Met Gala. I edited hours worth of photos for a couple people from the Met Gala. That's one of the craziest shoots ever, but that's a whole different genre, a whole different ballgame.
Yeah, kind of an extension of that too. Like, what's the most unique thing you've ever shot that's not pro wrestling?
Oh, that's a good question. Um, I don't know. There's just been so much from monster trucks, which is the loudest thing I've ever been in my whole life. The intensity and the sound is crazy. Um, it really comes down to wrestling, because when I do the red carpet, you if they look at you, you get the picture. You don't have to do anything to get the picture and be ready. Whereas in wrestling, you got to be ready at all times, and you got to make the photo. It doesn't come to you. You got to actually make it. They don't just look at you, point at you. I do a lot of baseball too. In baseball, I find if I concentrate on second base or concentrate on the third baseman, I'm going to get a pitcher. Concentrate on the pitcher. Now, to answer your question, that's a hard one. Nothing comes to mind that stands out. And it's time, everything at that moment is the best thing I'm doing.
Interesting. It's funny you mentioned baseball, because that was actually going to be my last question. Was I'm a fellow Mets fan, so I wanted to know what your favorite Mets moment was that you ever photographed.
86, when they won the World Series. That was it. It was amazing. Following it. I mean, I remember going in 69 when they won. I was there, not taking pictures. And I remember running on the field, and I could see myself on the clip, number one on the Daily News. That going back to that, when they won in '88, they didn't win. They won the pennant. I was on the back page of the Daily News with Keith Hernandez and Gary Carter and me in the Post and in the Daily News. I got that picture. But you made me think about it. It could have been Gary Carter's Hall of Fame induction. Could have been the best event I did. I just loved it. I was there. I took pictures for Gary, for his family, and holding the plaque and doing everything. That could have been one of the best things I did.
I wanted to follow up too on something outside of the 3 count. Also, you mentioned somebody asked you about WrestleMania 1, or you answered a question about WrestleMania 1 the other day, and you were at attendance at. Were you shooting at WrestleMania 1?
No, we were barred from ringside. We were barred from the arena. I went there as a fan, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. After being in it for a lot of years up until that point, and not being allowed to be there to photograph it, and coming in as a fan with a hat on and staying incognito, but just to be there, the intensity and what was going on was just crazy, crazy, crazy. It was something I had never seen at that time or for a long time after that. The only thing that comes close to that was a couple of years later when Kerry Von Erich and Ric Flair in Texas Stadium had the same intensity. Not as much because it's outdoors, so it's not on top of you, but it had the same kind of feel.
And I'm so glad you mentioned about Vince McMahon had cut off access to basically the outside photographers, and because he was doing his own magazine and basically was taken over. But it was nice for me to see later on when they finally reversed that, so people such as yourself and Bill Apter and whomever else could get the credit for all the work that you did in building up that company. Because
well, what it was too, they were, quote, losing, unquote. They were. If you picked up a magazine, WCW was number 1, ECW was number 2, and the WWF was number 3. And it got to be that in the fans' mind, because if you look at the content of the magazine, that's the way it was divided.
Yeah,
you would just see a little bit of the WWF at that time. And they asked us, from now on, you can come back, you could take pictures. And I said, oh, it's okay. I don't need to come. That's the way I felt. I didn't need it. I just didn't need it. And they said, oh, you won't be bothered. We would like you to be here and take pictures, because they wanted to be on equal footing with everyone else.
Yeah, it's amazing what happens when you are the link to the fans getting information and the fans getting images, that your voice matters, and they needed it. And it's from my own perspective, I just want to thank you for all the work that you've done over the years. You've been an inspiration to me since I was very young in kind of getting into the media side of things. So thanks for all the work you've done over the years. And
thank you very much for having me and for talking and for recognizing a few of the things that I did.
Yeah, it's been a real pleasure to have you on the show, George Napolitano. Thanks so much for joining me today on Under the Ring Pro Wrestling Conversations.
You're welcome. Thank you.